Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to this month's Global Cafe on work and economic productivity, intersection of aging, workforce, and economics. I also want to say Happy New Year. We're off to a brand new year with lots of opportunity and excitement, and also a very challenged geopolitical landscape at the moment, but we are glad to be together as a global community. Before we begin, just a quick note on some housekeeping. This session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel and website. We encourage you to take part in the discussion, so feel free to use the chat to share your comments or questions. These sessions are always stronger when we hear from many voices, so we encourage you to participate. And if you're able, we also welcome you to keep your camera on during the Global Cafe. And lastly, just to keep everyone's audio clear, we kindly ask that you keep your microphone muted unless we invite someone to speak to ensure a smooth and engaging session. So it's my absolute privilege to introduce Dr. Dorothea Schimdt-Klau. Before becoming chief of the Employment, Labor Markets, and Youth EMPLAB branch of the ILO, the Employment Policy Department in the ILO, the International Labor Organization, Dorothea was the head of the Department Management and Coordination Unit. In both functions, she supported the work of the department to promote full and productive employment by developing integrated employment, development, and skills policies. She was the senior employment specialist for North Africa, based in the Decent Work country team for North Africa in Cairo between 2009 and 2013. Welcome, Dorothea.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
We've had the chance to have couple of conversations over the last little while, which have just been fantastic. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. But before we dive in, which we'll do imminently, I just love to, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became engaged in aging. You kind of have a really interesting story. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's very interesting in the sense that my PhD thesis, which is a long time ago, was actually related to the topic, and it was about family economics. And at the time, there was a big debate, why are rates declining so much? And the neoclassical answer to this question was, well, because people don't need children as their pension system anymore. And I tried to argue at the time that this is actually not the reason for them having less children. I tried to come up with new ideas why this is happening, and it had all to do with the root ways, the deep ways families function, and it was actually the functioning of the families that changed over time, not because of pension systems or pension wishes, but for many, many other reasons. That led to less children, and the less children led to what we are talking about now, which is aging societies. So a long time ago, when aging was not the issue yet, I already worked on it. And then I actually got my job with the ILO because I was working on this topic. But then I never worked on it. I actually worked for the longest time on youth-related and female-related issues.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, national debates started to be all about aging. We had our last official debate on that in 2013 at our International Labour Conference. And since then, I've been working on the topic. And the more I work on it, the more I come back to my PhD thesis. So the circle is closing, and finally, I work on what I was hired for. So that's really great.
Interesting.
Yes, it's funny how life plays sometimes.
Well, we're going to dive a little deeper into that, but I wonder, just before we do, could you just tell us a little bit, like, what is the ILO? Just give us, frame for us
Mhm.
what the ILO is, what its purpose is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, there are many things to say about the ILO. Above all, I think it's the greatest organization within the UN family. But of course, I'm biased, so don't take me on that one. But why do I say that? It's because it's the only organization, UN organization, that is actually tripartite, meaning every country is represented through employers, workers, and governments. So when we do something, it's always we need the agreement of all three sides. Now, that, as we know, might mean compromising because it's three very different sides. We try to get engaged, but it means it's carried by the whole of societies. And that, I think, is very important. The other thing is we are a standard setting organization. So we set international labor standards, but any standard, whether it's a recommendation or a convention, is based on tripartite dialogue. So it's not us saying this is how things should go. It's our constituents saying how things should go. And once we have our international labor standards, we work with the countries to implement them. So it's a very exciting work within a normative framework. And I think that's very unique.
Interesting, interesting. Well, we had been having some great conversations lately, and referencing the longevity imperative by Andrew J. Scott, and I really appreciate how he frames that population aging is not a problem. It's not the problem. That's the tremendous triumph. The challenge is that from a systems perspective, from a social perspective, from an economic perspective, we're not adapting, we're not prepared, we're not addressing this incredible triumph of population aging. And of course, employment is key to the future of our societies, and an aging workforce and the ability for older people to work and engage. And it affects so many sectors, and it's multi-layered. It affects gender, families, everything. And so I wanted to let's just dive right in, Dorothea. What's the headline? Like, what do you think is the key issue related to labor and aging?
Well, I think the key issue is that we are approaching things from the wrong perspective. If we hear the word aging, I think literally everybody immediately has negative associations with it. Slower GDP growth, slowing productivity growth, higher pension systems where you have to contribute more, but you get less out of it, or you are forced to work longer. So everything we associate with aging is very negative, while we are talking about one of the biggest achievements of mankind. People are getting older, and they are not just getting older, they are getting older in a relatively healthy way. They have longer lives. They can enjoy life after their work life. So this is something very positive, and it comes with many, many positive aspects for societies. And everything I said about the perceptions we have about aging, every single one is just simply wrong. So we are having a debate on aging, which is based entirely on assumptions that every single one we can show it's wrong. And that's a very interesting thing, I think. How can that happen?
Yeah, yeah, we do. It's just so true. Um, well, let's talk about that from a productivity perspective. What are some of these biggest misconceptions about aging workforces that we all still seem to hold? Not, of course, policymakers and employers and so on, but what are some of these big misconceptions?
There are many, many. I think two of the most harming ones. One is at the more individual level, and the other one is at the macro level. So at the individual level, we hear it over and over again. Older workers are inevitably less productive. So if the workforce ages because of aging societies, it means we become, as a whole, we become less productive. And this is absolutely not true, starting from the point that maybe when it comes to physical activities, people might not be able to do the same level of physical activities when they are older. But even that, there are many studies that show the opposite. But most of our tasks, or many of our tasks, are actually knowledge-based, judgment-based, coordination intensive, where performance is absolutely stable, if not improving with age, because you come with your experience. Okay,
Mhm.
so what we actually see, even in physical terms, we see that productivity increases until, I mean, physical activity more or less increases until your mid 40s. Then it stays stable until your mid 50s. And then your experience kicks in so that you are not less productive. Of course, it's super difficult to measure these things because you're comparing apples and oranges. But just because it's difficult, it doesn't mean that we can simply assume that it's right what people say. So it's actually not right. And we actually see in many of the studies that because of the experience that people gain, they become more productive. And just to give you one example on this, it's true most of the geniuses that had successful startups, they were relatively young, but we don't talk about 20-year-olds, we talk about 30 to 45-year-olds. But all the enterprises that then built on their successful startup were run by older people. Okay, because this is where all these other means come into play. And of course, not everybody is a startup person, but what I'm saying is it's just simply not true. That we are less productive when we are older. Of course, there are less productive people, but there are less productive people at young age as well. Now, the second one is this assumption, well, oh my God, societies become, productivity increases become less in aging societies. Well, first of all, let me just give you a very simple example. The biggest issue we have in terms of productivity increases is that developing economies don't catch up with the developed economies. And actually, in recent times, recent almost decades now, the gap between the productivity of the rich countries and the poor countries is increasing again. Now, the poor countries don't have an aging issue. The rich countries have an aging issue, but their productivity is increasing. The productivity of the youthful ones is declining. So, I mean, this is something we talk about all the time. We see it, and then we still say productivity decreases, if they happen, are due to aging societies. And the bottom of this is that people think aging means less people working. Less people working means less productivity increases. Productivity is determined by many, many factors. Okay. Above all, by technological progress. Okay. And even if it's true that we have less people working, we have many means to make the group of people working grow again, or to make those who work become more productive. And we are not using these means. If we were to use these means, aging would actually could not be used as an argument for any negative impact on productivity.
Hmm. Wow, that's interesting. I mean, it really makes me think of things like the old age dependency ratio that everyone seems to rush to for economic evaluation. I mean, could you speak about that and how just maybe tell us a little bit about what is that ratio and why is it unhelpful?
Is indeed very unhelpful. Dependency makes me already feel very uncomfortable. It seems like there are people in societies that depend on others. Well, maybe they do, but they have, for years, they were the ones who were providing the inputs for economies. So to just simply call them dependents, that's one issue. But what the issue really is the economic dependency ratio is taking all those at working age, and they say that these are the ones that can provide help, assistance for those outside of the working age. Okay, so if you have a certain age, you contribute to support those who are not at working age. But that's complete nonsense. Because there are many people at older age who would want to participate in labor markets and who actually participate more and more in labor markets. They are not dependents. On the contrary, they are supporting their children's families who have children. Okay, that's the one group of people. And then within those at working age, there are so many who are not working. For example, all the discouraged, all the young who are neither in education nor in employment or in training. There are all the women that don't get the opportunity to work. So there is a huge potential within the working age population that we are not using. So calculating this indicator does not tell you anything at all. It's a completely mathematical, quantitative indicator that has nothing to do with the realities we actually see. And because we are using it and we are saying, oh, dependency ratios are increasing and increasing in aging societies, that again gives us an argument for the negative attitude. And we don't really take the opportunity to say, but let's look into this group of working age. Are they really working? Are they all independent? Do they have good enough jobs to not only support themselves, but others? And if we do that, we come to completely different results. And it gives us the true point, the true entry point to change things.
I guess that leads right into the risk of addressing, which everyone seems to run to in aging only through pension reform, without looking at a much more holistic view in labor market, social protection, and so on. Yeah.
Absolutely. Um, if I was to ask the audience here, if you hear the word pension reform, what are you thinking about? I guess the majority would say, I'm thinking about higher contributions, getting less out of it, being forced to work longer. That's the three things that are discussed when we discuss pension reforms. Okay, now this is only a tiny, tiny part of the story, and it's actually, again, not even true. Nobody wants to force people to work longer. It's about creating an environment where those who want to work longer can actually work longer. And it's about creating an environment where this huge achievements of having pension systems actually can continue to work. And one of the main reasons, and that is the link to labor markets, the most obvious link, is let more people work who can work. Okay, let us give more opportunities for women to work and not just work in jobs where they are completely overeducated, but really give them the job opportunities where they can give their potential to societies. Let us make sure that these tremendous need rates, these are the young people neither in employment, education, or training, decrease. They have been stubbornly high over time and coming with a huge risk because if, as a young person, your first job is not good, your likelihood to stay in bad jobs increases tremendously over time. So this is still an issue, and the need rates are three times as high for women as for young women as for men. There is a potential, a huge untapped potential. We are not using the best educated generation that we have. Let us give older people the opportunity to actually work if they want to work. And then I don't want to open a very politically sensitive issue, but if we feel that we don't have enough people working in our countries, well, there are millions of people in the world who would be happy to migrate and work if it's a decent job. So instead of saying, oh, no, 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 this is an absolute no-go, let us at least have the debates of the enormous potential that is out there in the world to make our pension systems safe and secure. So I think this is very important. And then, of course, this issue with the productivity. One determinant of productivity is, of course, the skill level of people. Okay. And there is this idea that if you train older people, then there is a hope that actually they become more productive. The problem is that this concept of lifelong learning is not really applied. It's just spoken about, but not really applied.
That's a real life course approach and looking at, reframing your anyone at any stage of their employment career is reframing how they think about work, especially as they age, not just, oh well, I'm just going to work till I'm 60. Why you could work till you're 70, 80 and beyond. And how do we frame that? How do we build environments and rebuild our policy structure to allow for a flexible and equitable workforce? Well, let's we when we spoke before, and you alluded to it at the beginning of your introduction of your original studies, where you see the real the heart of the issue around, and we talked about families and a little and about gender. Can you talk about that for us?
Well, as with actually most of the drivers of change, and demographic shifts is certainly maybe the biggest driver of change, even though we don't talk about it as much as we talk about other drivers of change. There is a high risk that actually women are affected negatively, more negatively than men. So why am I saying that? Well, more and more because of non-functioning pension systems and people getting older, which is coming with a lot of more care needs, it is women who take over the care jobs. And of course, it's once again, like with bringing up children, it's unpaid care work. Okay, it's non-recognized care work. It doesn't contribute to their pension. It doesn't contribute to their income. So there is a high risk and very high expectations of societies that these jobs are more and more taken over by women. And this is, of course, a huge, huge danger. I mean, what are women facing now? When women are young, they are told you don't get a job because there is a risk that you become pregnant and you leave us. When they are middle-aged, they are told, well, I can only give you a bad job because you don't come with the experience. Well, of course not, because they didn't have a job. And now when they are older, people say, well, I don't give you a job because there is a risk that you might have to care for your parents. And then we are surprised that at the end of all this, women end up in poverty once they leave labor markets. Okay. And it's true that within the developed economy and actually across the world, but especially in developed economies, the biggest trend in poverty increase comes from older women. They are driving the poverty trends. And we urgently need to do something because what is happening right now is actually even increasing the risk that this trend becomes permanent. Now, the question is, what do we have as alternatives? And I don't want to say that families are the alternative. They are the alternative in a new way of thinking where you share care responsibilities. But it's not about giving the burden, passing the burden to the families. It is about rethinking how important families are in our societies and supporting families so that they can actually do what they are supposed to do, which is many things, but amongst others, also having children. Okay, so we need to rethink how we can actually support families so that within the families, everybody can do what they want to do, which in many cases, because we have this educated workforce, is people want to work. It's not that people only work because they have to work. The majority of people, if they have a good job, they like to work. So I think we need to much better integrate the needs of families into our thinking and into our policy making. Usually there are very, very few family policies in many countries. And let me just add one thing. We don't know that much about how policies function and why they function. We try to find out and we know some things, but not that much. But we know one thing. Every attempt so far to have family economics that lead to more children have not worked. Or they worked to an extent that was far below the replacement level of 2.1 children per family. So let's really, really rethink how we do policies that really support families. And I think this needs a new approach and it needs an intergenerational thinking because at the end of the day, we are all at different stages, different parts of families. And already when we are a child, we need to think about our role when we are old. And throughout our life course, we need to make sure that things build upon each other and that we are happy and strong in terms of what we can contribute as families.
Well, that's powerful. Really brings it right down to the community level, the personal level. It's both policy, but it's a rethinking. I guess it really speaks to ageism, doesn't it? I mean, to what extent, maybe you could expand on that. Does ageism act as a productivity constraint at an economic level, say?
Well, ageism, I mean, first of all, the definition of ageism is not just that we have wrong perceptions about older people. Ageism happens at every stage. I mean, we are very ageist against young people, which is why we have these high need rates, okay? Because we say they don't work, they don't have the right education, etc., etc. So ageism is really something, let's rethink how we think about certain age groups. And for me, ageism is the core reason why we are at the state we are, because it's this ageist thinking that hinders us to see that aging societies come with tremendous opportunities. Okay, I know it's always a critical point, but just think of the enormous demand that is created because people get older. Well, first of all, they consume for much longer periods, which is great. Okay. Then it is sad but true that many older people have care needs. Care is an enormous industry. Okay.
Mm,
It's the one industry that is increasing tremendously, that creates jobs, that can create decent jobs if well designed, that can create jobs mainly for women, which is the group we have been ignoring most. So, as a matter of fact, aging comes with so many opportunities, but it's because of ageism that we don't see them. Okay. And if
mm,
you get sensitive to how ageist the world is, you come across it all the time, and even we ourselves support it. I mean, how often do I say, oh my God, I cannot do this because I'm too old? This is too much for me because I'm too old. It's so inherent in our thinking that we ourselves support it, we meaning me being an older person. So you see that the problem is really that's the root cause of all the issues. I have not heard for a long time, and I do remember in my childhood it was different, that anybody would say something fantastic about the capacities of grandparents. Okay, I mean, the majority of kids are not looked after by grandparents because they are all sent to nurseries or whatsoever. Then they go to full day schools, etc., etc. But the role grandparents used to play and the close relationship the young people had with their grandparents was fantastic. That's internet and intergenerational solidarity at its best. And if you rebuild these relationships, then the young people will not talk negatively about their grandparents, and the grandparents will not talk negatively about the young people. Okay. And that would give us the ground to say, okay, we are in this together. Let's think of solutions where everybody, no matter what age, no matter what gender, no matter where you live, contributes at its best to societies and to development and society growth. And I think this is really, really different. And I don't want to say, old times were always better, but it is a good idea to look at how families functioned at different points in time and how they still function in different parts of the world. And this family attitude also leads to what you were mentioning, this contribution of the community level to the situation of aging. Okay. And you can clearly learn here actually from countries in less developed contexts. Because what we see in less developed contexts is, yes, in total populations are growing, but in rural areas, they are shrinking like crazy because all the young people leave rural areas to an
mm,
extent that there is a risk to food security because the food of the poor countries is produced in their own rural areas. If there are only very few old people, it's not going to work. Okay, and that has nothing to do with the fact that they cannot, well, there is a point where you cannot work as an agricultural worker anymore, but it also has to do that, of course, there is no investment in technology, et cetera, in these areas. And this is really risky. And now you go to these areas and you see how they try to build communities that are attractive enough for young people to stay or come back. We can really learn a lot from there.
Mm, mm. Well, it's interesting. What do you have any ideas or examples of age-friendly approaches or workplace practices or effective policies that improve both job quality and output and are actually showing some results?
We do see a lot of successes on anything which is related to mixed teams, mixed age
Mixed teams.
teams, mixed age teams. There are some enterprises that really make sure that when there is a team task to be done, all age groups are there. And that shows to have an enormous positive impact because you get the excitement and the curiosity of the young people, and you get the experience of the older people. Not to say that they are not curious, but you have the different aspects within one team. So that works very much. But it also works on a more individual level in the sense that mentoring young mentor old and old mentor young, so in both directions, it's something that is working very well. Some companies, and actually I tried this within my own team as well, they changed jobs for a day. So they let like young people do the job of the older person and the older person doing the job of the younger person, and then they exchange on it. That's a brilliant way of doing it because it overcomes perception. Oh, the old person is doing nothing. And for the older ones, oh, the young person is just doing computer games while he or she should be working. So that's really anything linked to that fosters communication between the generation works very well. And then what works perfectly well, and this is where I really want to insist that policies really matter. We can look at countries where we have a very high level of labor force participation rate of older people, the highest being in Sweden and in the Netherlands. Okay, now if you look both of these countries and many of the other countries, they have legislation, policies that actually say older people have the right for their workplaces to be adjusted to their needs. Okay, what does that mean? Well, older people, they might want more flexible working times. They might want to telework more. They might want to have a part-time work, not work full-time. And all these things are easy to implement, but it's a question, is it a right of an older person? Or is it something the older person needs to fight for? And if it's a right, then it's easy. Then, the enterprises will act accordingly. The important thing here is the institution of social dialogue. We very often assume what older people might want or need without actually talking to them. Okay. And you will be very surprised. Like one of the things we think it's all about money. Well, actually, most of the older people, they don't care about the money. They care a lot about recognition, okay, of what they are doing, of what they are contributing. That means you need a completely different incentive structure. You cannot do what you are doing for young people, for old people, and you cannot assume that you know what needs to be done. And then, of course, the biggest impact, and sorry to be repetitive here, is anything that fights against ageism. And I've done this, you go to enterprises, you come with the 5 biggest perceptions against older people, and you show them that they are wrong. Okay. And it's easy because it is wrong. Okay. You talk to them about how older people learn differently. It's not that they cannot learn, they just learn differently. And that's an eye opener. And all of a sudden, people say, well, maybe it's a better strategy to keep our older workers or to even get some of them back that we might have left the company because A, we had invested in them so heavily. So we want to, why would we not want to profit from this? And B, they actually come with advantages that even the most brilliant genius young person could not have. So I think every measure that fights against ageism at the individual level, at the family level, at the enterprise level, at the social society level is super, super important, because if we don't manage to get this turnaround, then everything we do will come with this very negative attitude. And I mean, why negative attitude just doesn't work.
Yeah, gosh, it's so rich. I just want to. Tina and Shmuel are asking sort of a similar question about, what, from a government perspective or from a policies legislation perspective, what's needed to, in Tina's words, continues for older people to use their skills. And she says, references, despite of having less physical energy, for example, but I think we can also expand that to say how can we create what's needed to create the flexibility or the opportunities to encourage and include older people in a workforce.
We have very good examples, and I'm getting back to the examples in a second, in the countries I mentioned, but also across many other European countries and richer countries. So, first of all, as I said, policies matter enormously. But what I want to mention here is the long-term impact of policies. And I'm referring here to Sweden. I know a lot about Sweden because I wrote a couple of papers on Sweden, because I find the system so fascinating. That's why I keep quoting them, but they are not the only ones. In the beginning, when they realized we have this issue of a shrinking workforce, but we have still a lot of people that we can reintegrate into labor markets. Young people, women, and old people. That's the three groups where we see relatively low participation rates. So they put legislation in place, and then the society changed. They didn't even need the legislation anymore, because it was completely natural that you would
Mm,
work until you are 75. It became a habit, because you actually, through the policies, you gave people something they wanted to do anyway. People want to contribute to societies. People want to earn money. It's a good feeling. It's not just a necessity, it's a good feeling. So now in Sweden, you don't even need that much policy push for what is happening. It's just entirely natural. They have a labor force participation rate of the 55 to 60, which is above 80%. That's something we dream about in other
wow.
countries, even for
Wow.
the middle-aged, okay? And even at the higher age, it's still extremely, extremely high, okay? And it's just society supported, and it's all because the policies led to this shift that I'm talking about. Now, how did they do it? Well, the first thing is, the smart thing that these countries did is they realized on time that if we continue as we did, pension systems will collapse. Okay. They created the understanding in their societies that this can happen, that this will happen if there is no change. And they created a sense of responsibility, because nobody in these countries wants pension systems to fail. We don't want to go into a system where the only security you have is your private security, so that the rich ones are secured and the poor ones are not. So there was this notion, there was this political willingness to say, okay, we need we need to do everything that this fantastic idea of pension systems and protecting older people can continue. And the means we have is that we keep people longer, or we reintegrate people into the labor market. So there were incentive policies for enterprises. If you hire an older person, we support you. There was policies for lifelong learning. Okay, and these were two very successful policies. There was policies to give, as I said earlier, older people the right to adjust, that their workplace gets adjusted to their needs. Okay. And all this happened in parallel with the debate about the pension systems. And in the end, it actually, yes, as of course, pension contributions became higher, people worked longer, but it was in both cases that the society was okay with it. If you have a good job, it doesn't really matter if a bit more goes into the pension system. If you know one day I will also profit from it. Okay.
Hmm.
The reason why young people are so upset these days, it's A, because the jobs they get are not decent enough that they make a good living. So from the already low level of income they have, if they have to give bigger contributions so that older people get their pensions, of course it's upsetting, especially when most likely when I'm old, there is no pension system. Okay, so what all the policies that worked showed is that you need an integrated approach which impacts concrete policies, but also impacts political thinking and the thinking of societies. And that really worked. And I really want to say one word about the lifelong learning, approach, which is absolutely key and essential. It's essential to overcome ageism because only when we see older people being as smart as young people, then we can overcome the perception. Okay, but it's also essential because whatever labor market measure you do, it always needs to work on the supply side and the demand side. So we have to create the jobs for older people, but we also have to equip the older people with what they need for these jobs. So in terms of lifelong learning, I get often asked, so tell us, which is the best functional system? And my honest answer is there is none. Okay. Lifelong learning is a concept that for the time being mainly exists on paper. And this leads to a very difficult situation. Lifelong learning does not stop when people are 50. It actually stops when people get their first job. Okay. That's at the age where people also start having families, etc., etc. There are other things in life. For the first time, they have money. And this is when people say, well, I've invested so heavily into my education, my training. I'm done. Okay. And then people don't do a lot of training. And what happens is they lose their capacity to learn.
Mm.
All the studies clearly show if you continue to learn throughout your life course, your capacity to learn at the old age is almost equal to your capacity to learn at a young age. So this issue, all children learn languages so easily, it's true. But if throughout your life you learn new languages, you can easily learn even a very difficult language when you're older. Learning is like a muscle. And if you don't train it, it's going to deteriorate. So if you don't make sure that between the age of, let's say, 35 and 50, people get lifelong learning, okay, don't expect that investment in lifelong learning at the age of 50 will work. It will not. Okay, because people have lost their capacity to actually learn. And this is really, really essential. So we really, really need to get our acts together from the government side, but also from the workers and the employer side to say, listen, it's your responsibility to make sure that people learn all through their life. And then there is absolutely no capacity issue when you're older. So I think lifelong learning policies are essential. I'm still looking for a very good example that really takes this approach all through the life course.
That's a really interesting point. I'm glad we're recording this session, Dorothea. These have been some gems. Um, Mark Venning shares one of your articles actually in the chat by you, Dorothea, How to Adapt Labor Markets to Changing Demographics from last February. I alert you to as well. Mark has shared the Longevity Learning and the Future of Work Century Summit, a 2-day virtual attendance on February 17th and 18th, presented by the Longevity Project in collaboration with the Stanford Center on Longevity. So I invite you all to have a look at that. Valerie Powell has shared that she has had some recent examples of workers being invited back after retirement due to a shortage of qualified people, such as police officers and nurses. I wondered, Valerie, if you'd like to just share a couple of words on that, if you would.
I presume that the shortage of healthcare professionals is here, let me find my video, is not just in our country or region, but probably in most developed countries or even the world. And there have been locally at our hospital, many of the nurses who have retired have been approached to see if they would come back. The good thing about being approached is that then those issues that you talked about of flexibility, they're more likely to give them that flexibility because they need them. Um,
Mhm.
and there was a recent news article about a police officer who's been reinstated because I guess you have to be reinstated
Mhm.
officially, um, as an example of the shortage of qualified police officers in our country. So I don't know if that's happening other places or simply in Canada.
It does happen in the countries where the legislation allows for it. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of countries where this is not allowed. And let me just share one thought with you. There is a history behind why trade unions don't want to talk about flexible rules in terms of retirement, okay? And always, keeping in mind, let people work if they want to work, not forcing them. And this is because pension systems and retirement age was one of the first and biggest achievements of trade unions. It was one of the most fantastic achievements to say, listen, people are working so hard, there is a point where they cannot work anymore. And then that was created at a point where the majority of work was purely physical work. Okay. They cannot work anymore, and they have given so much, most of them have given their health for this job. We need to protect these people. It really is one of the big achievements, and it is something that you don't see happening in countries where trade unions are not active, where you don't have proper social dialogue. Okay, so and there is a value to it. What needs to be understood is that these pension systems, retirement systems, were introduced at a time where the life expectancy was so low that the majority of people didn't even get a pension because unfortunately they died before getting a pension. Now, literally everybody receives a pension. So we are talking about a different context, and we have to react to this context. As I said, it's an achievement that now almost everybody can enjoy a pension and years of, really profiting from a pension system. But then there is the other issue with the labor shortage. And the reason why we are sitting here and debating what we are debating is because it's the labor shortage that drove the interest in this topic. Okay. And of course, as always, if there is a necessity, an economic necessity, people are more likely to react to it. Okay. So in that sense, it's a very good thing that this labor shortage becomes so obvious. Now, in terms of the labor shortage, getting people into labor markets is one of the issues. And I just want to share with you something I haven't mentioned that much so far. So we need the policies, but we also need the institutions to work. Okay, because the institutions, the labor market institutions, are implementing the policies. And for example, public employment services, a fantastic intervention and absolutely essential, especially for vulnerable groups within societies. They are not equipped for that because what does a public employment service do? They deal with people who come to them, okay, and then they try to find a job for them. Now, a person who is discouraged is outside of the labor force. How can a counselor in a public employment service get to this person? Because this person is, by definition, not looking for work. But we want to check with this person that maybe under certain circumstances, the person might want to come back. Maybe the policeman might want to come back if the condition is I'm only working 50%, or I'm not going to the most dangerous parts of the city, but there are many other parts of the city where I can still contribute to security. So, how do we equip institutions to reach out to those people? How do we get these people? And that's a complete shift in terms of how labor market institutions work. And I can only tell you there are very creative ways in Great Britain. They have so-called employment buses, and that's public employment service officers who got a driving license to drive a bus, and they actually go with their buses to rural areas and talk to people and say, hey, what are you doing all day long? Wouldn't it be great if you would come and work for a little while? What would it be that you really would want to do? And with a bit of training, do you think we could get you back into this? This is a completely new field of work. It needs entirely different labor market institutions and education for people, those people who are doing this job. So as much as policies matter, institutions matter as well. And we see when I started working on this topic like 10 years ago, I saw absolutely none of this. There was no flexibility in terms of new regulations, how to get people reinstalled into labor markets, not even a debate on it. Now we see it happening in every little country that is faced with a challenge. So I think it's very important. And just maybe one last word, the care sector is actually the sector where we see that in a way we are very fortunate that the demographic shift happens at the same time as the digitalization. And why am I saying this? Well, if you don't have enough people, okay, if many societies are not willing to open their societies from people from the outside, then the only way you can get the jobs done is by using technology. Okay. And we have the technology now that we can fill some of the gaps through technology. Now, this, of course, is a whole new debate on, should technology replace jobs in the care sector? But if you see, it's already happening in, for example, all hospitals. And it's actually better perceived by the people working there than we originally thought, because these people now realize that technology is really a help, and that it doesn't mean replacing them, it means helping them. So in that sense, even though we always say, oh my God, there are all these changes, we have the negative impacts of digitalization, we have the negative impacts of demographics, we have the negative impacts of climate change, we have the for these two changes, the demographics and the digital, we are very fortunate that they are happening at the same time, because otherwise it would be even more difficult to turn the opportunity that is definitely there really into something positive and not be scared about what is happening.
Wow, thank you. Another some pearls. Thank you, Dorothea. We have many more comments and suggestions rolling through our chat, but we're coming to the close of our cafe today. It inspires us that maybe we need a part two here. We've just really scratching the surface. I'm going to ask you one more question, Dorothea, just to consider as I wrap things up. We'll let you close the conversation, and that question is, if you could prioritize one thing, what do we have, say, a good 10, 15 years here, let's call it a decade, to really make some impact as population aging is accelerating. We have countries moving from 10 to 20% of a population over 60 or 65 over the next 15, 20 years. We really need to act. If you could prioritize one thing, maybe it's a policy shift, or a change that we need to work for to better align aging, work, productivity, the inclusion of older people over the next decade, what would it be and why? So maybe just think about that just for a moment. And before we close this session, I'd like to thank all of you joining us today who have been steadfast champions for healthy aging. We've achieved a great deal together this past year, and including two important surveys on multi-sectoral engagement and older adults' experiences of healthy aging. So as part of that, this month in January, the IFA will be hosting an interactive cross-sectoral town hall to share the survey's overarching findings and to discuss the challenges, innovations, and opportunities for global collaboration toward a future where everyone can age with health, choice, and dignity. So please do save the date, January 20th. Berenice is popping it into the chat. It's 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 1:30 p.m. CET, 12:30 p.m. GMT, and 4:30 a.m. PST, a little early for you. The registration link is available in the chat, so we really do hope you can join us. And we hope you can also join us next month for our session on aging and AI, which will be artificial intelligence, following in on just what Dr. Schimdt-Klau has been sharing with us in her last point. So thank you everyone for joining us today on the Global Cafe. Over to you, Dr. Schimdt-Klau, for your answer on what's the one thing we need to do. And thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thanks a lot. It was a real pleasure, and I hope I get invited to the two events you were mentioning because they are super interesting, and I would really like to learn about your findings. For me, and of course, I mean, I come from the employment policy department, so my answer is again a bit biased. Policies need to change, and they need to change in terms of the way they think. They need to have as the basis an intergenerational and life course oriented thinking. Okay, we are beyond the age where an active labor market policies does something for young people but ignores the impact it has on old people. We are beyond the age where all of a sudden we can say to young people, listen, there is no money for you anymore. We need to invest it in old people. Policies really need to take this thinking that we all need to contribute. They need to be comprehensive. And as I said again and again, this can only happen if we overcome ageism. It's not that young people or old people are a problem. They are an untapped potential. Okay, and we need policies to actually tap into their potential so that these people can contribute. They don't want to be a burden. They don't have to be a burden. They are an asset. And I just want to maybe close with the words, policies matter, of course, but institutions matter, societies matter, and individuals matter. The best policy cannot be carried out if nobody is interested in what older people need or want. Okay, so we really need to have these shifts throughout. And if it happens, then each of this reinforces the other. If you have great institutions that are able to implement a good policy, then people believe in the policy. And if people believe in the policy, maybe like in the case of Sweden, things become more natural and you don't even need the policy push anymore. So really, let's think in a more integrated way. Let's overcome silo thinking. And let's make sure that this issue, that is so important for societies, that is really going to decide whether societies work or whether they don't work. Let's really make an effort, and I'm very grateful to talk to all of you because you are all a part of this community. Let's make an effort to make people understand that aging is an opportunity and not just a threat.
Dorothea, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to future conversations. And we'll see you all on January 20th at our town hall. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was fantastic. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.